Picture this. The year is 260 AD near the ancient city of Edessa in northern Mesopotamia. The dust has settled after a catastrophic battle and something impossible is happening. Valerian, Emperor of Rome, ruler of the Mediterranean world, commander of legions that have conquered from Britain to Syria, is kneeling in the dirt before a Persian king. His purple imperial cloak is torn and dusty. His face shows the shock of a man whose entire world has just shattered. Standing over him, mounted on a massive warhorse covered in scale armor, is Shapur, king of kings of the Sasanian Empire. Shapur reaches down and grasps the Roman emperor by the hair, forcing him to look up at his conqueror. This moment, a Roman emperor, captured alive in battle, has never happened before in Rome's 1,000-year history. It will be carved into stone cliffs at Nakshi Rustam, where travelers will see it for centuries, the mighty Roman emperor reduced to a kneeling prisoner while the Persian king towers above him in triumph. But how did Persia achieve this stunning reversal? How did a new dynasty rise from a remote corner of Iran to challenge Rome as an equal and capture its emperor? To understand, we need to go back 40 years to 224 AD, when another battle changed everything. The year is 224 AD. On the plains of Hormizdagan, somewhere between modern Isfahan and Hamadan, two armies face each other under the harsh Persian sun. This isn't just another battle, it's a clash between two visions of what Persia should be. On one side stands Artabanus V, the last king of the Parthian Empire, commanding the traditional heavy cavalry that has dominated Middle Eastern battlefields for nearly 500 years. His dynasty, the Arsacids, has ruled Persia since 247 BC, creating a loose feudal empire where regional nobles held enormous power and the king was often just first among equals. But this decentralized system, once a source of flexibility, has become fatal weakness. Regional governors act like independent kings, the empire fragments. Rome pushes into Mesopotamia. And now, from the southern province of Fars, a challenger has emerged who promises to restore Persian greatness through centralized power and divine authority. Ardashir I, as governor of Fars, had spent years methodically conquering neighboring territories and building an army loyal to him personally rather than to feudal obligations. He claimed descent from the ancient Achaemenid kings who had ruled the Persian Empire 600 years earlier. Though historians doubt this genealogy, it provided powerful propaganda. His grandfather Sasan had been a priest at the fire temple of Anahita in Istaka, giving the family religious legitimacy. Now Ardashir offered Persia something it desperately needed: strong, centralized leadership, religious unity through Zoroastrianism, and the promise of restored glory. When Artabanus V marched to crush this upstart governor, he found not a provincial rebel but a fully prepared rival dynasty. The Battle of Hormizdagan would last all day, and when the sun set, the 470-year-old Parthian dynasty would be dead, killed by Ardashir's sword in single combat. A new empire, the Sasanian Empire, was born in blood and ambition, and it would dominate the Middle East for the next 400 years. The battle itself revealed why Ardashir would succeed where the Parthians had failed. Artabanus V deployed his forces in the traditional Parthian manner: heavy cavalry called cataphracts in the center, warriors and horses both encased in scale armor, wielding 12-foot lances, with lighter horse archers on the flanks. This formation had crushed Roman legions at Carrhae in 53 BC and in countless battles since. But the Parthian military suffered from the same problem as their government: decentralization. Many regional nobles arrived late to the battle or didn't show up at all, leaving Artabanus with far fewer troops than he'd expected. Feudal loyalty only went so far when nobles calculated that Ardashir might win, and they didn't want to be on the losing side. Ardashir's army looked similar on paper: heavy cavalry, horse archers, supporting infantry, but it operated with a crucial difference: unified command and disciplined coordination. Ardashir had spent years building a centralized military structure where commanders answered directly to him, not to their own family interests. His cavalry units maneuvered with unprecedented precision, operating in multiple echelons that could maintain constant pressure while preserving reserves for decisive moments. When the Parthian charge achieved initial success, Ardashir's tactical reserves immediately counterattacked, preventing any breakthrough. As the day wore on, superior organization began to tell. Parthian units, lacking effective coordination, found themselves isolated and vulnerable to concentrated Sasanian attacks. A climactic moment came when Ardashir personally led a cavalry charge that smashed through the Parthian center, directly engaging Artabanus V in single combat. Both kings wielded traditional Persian swords while mounted on armored warhorses. Their personal duel became a microcosm of the larger dynastic struggle: old versus new, feudal versus centralized, weakness versus strength. Artabanus fell, struck down by Ardashir's blade. The last Parthian king died on the battlefield, and 470 years of Arsacid rule ended in a single afternoon. Ardashir emerged as the undisputed ruler of Persia, and he immediately began implementing reforms that would transform Persian governance, military organization, and religious life. The Sasanian revolution had begun, and it would reshape the ancient world's balance of power for the next 4 centuries. Ardashir understood that military victory was just the beginning. Unlike previous conquerors who often kept existing systems running, he implemented comprehensive reforms designed to centralize authority and eliminate the feudal fragmentation that had weakened Parthian rule. He systematically removed Arsacid nobles from positions of power, replacing them with loyal supporters drawn primarily from Fars province and other regions that had backed his rise. The old Parthian system of semi-autonomous regional governors answering mainly to themselves was dismantled. In its place, Ardashir created directly appointed provincial administrators who served at royal pleasure and depended entirely on his favor for their positions and wealth. Ctesiphon, the former Parthian capital located on the Tigris River opposite the ancient city of Seleucia, became the administrative heart of the new Sasanian Empire. Ardashir's decision to keep this location rather than building a new capital showed practical wisdom. Ctesiphon's strategic position controlled access to Mesopotamia's agricultural wealth while maintaining connections to both the Iranian highlands and the western territories bordering Rome. The city's existing infrastructure, developed over centuries of Parthian rule, could be adapted without massive expense. But Ardashir transformed Ctesiphon visually and ideologically. He ordered construction of new royal palaces incorporating architectural elements from ancient Achaemenid Persepolis, physically reinforcing his dynasty's claimed connection to Iran's ancient imperial tradition. The famous Tak Kasra, a massive barrel-vaulted audience hall with its soaring brick arch spanning over 80 feet without intermediate support, became the physical embodiment of Sasanian royal power. But Ardashir's most revolutionary reform involved religion. The Parthians had been religiously tolerant, allowing various cults to coexist. Ardashir fundamentally changed this by establishing Zoroastrianism as the official state religion and creating a centralized priestly hierarchy directly subordinate to royal authority. This wasn't just about faith, it was brilliant political strategy. Religious centralization provided ideological justification for Sasanian rule, created a unified administrative class loyal to the crown, and differentiated the new dynasty from Parthian predecessors. Kartir, who would become the most powerful Zoroastrian priest in Sasanian history, began his rise during Ardashir's reign. The king appointed him to establish fire temples throughout the empire and train a professional priesthood. These priests served dual functions as spiritual leaders and administrative agents, creating an unprecedented fusion of religious and secular authority. Fire temples became centers not just of worship, but of government, storing tax records, birth registries, and royal decrees. The Sasanian state and Zoroastrian church became inseparable. Ardashir promoted divine kingship more aggressively than his Parthian predecessors. Royal inscriptions emphasized the king's role as Ahura Mazda's earthly representative, responsible for maintaining cosmic order and protecting the faithful from darkness and chaos. This wasn't empty propaganda, it provided powerful justification for centralized authority. If the king ruled by divine mandate, challenging him meant challenging the gods themselves. Administrative reforms complemented religious changes. Ardashir abolished the semi-autonomous satrapies that had characterized Parthian governance, replacing them with directly appointed provincial governors paid by the central treasury rather than living off local taxes. This made governors dependent on royal favor, reducing opportunities for the regional autonomy that had undermined Parthian power. The new administrative system incorporated sophisticated record-keeping. Royal scribes, many trained by Zoroastrian priests, maintained detailed registers of landholding, agricultural production, taxation, and military obligations. This bureaucratic apparatus gave the central government unprecedented knowledge of imperial resources, enabling more effective coordination of military campaigns and public works. Military reorganization strengthened central authority further. Ardashir established a professional standing army directly controlled by the royal court, reducing dependence on unreliable feudal levies. The military maintained traditional emphasis on heavy cavalry but incorporated improved training, standardized equipment, and centralized command. Regional military commanders received direct royal appointments and could be transferred between theaters to prevent personal loyalties from challenging royal authority. Territorial expansion began almost immediately, Armenia, controlling access routes between the Iranian plateau and Anatolia, became an early target. Armenian nobility had played Parthians and Romans against each other for generations to preserve autonomy. Ardashir's centralized approach threatened this balance, leading to armed resistance. The Sasanian conquest of Armenia combined military campaigns with diplomatic maneuvering to exploit divisions within Armenian nobility. Some princes, recognizing the futility of resisting a reinvigorated Persian empire, accepted Sasanian overlordship in exchange for confirmation of local authority. Others, with strong Roman ties, sought military support from Constantinople. This division enabled Ardashir to achieve substantial gains without massive military commitments. Mesopotamia, with its ancient cities and agricultural wealth, represented another crucial target. The region's strategic importance extended beyond economics. It served as a buffer against Roman expansion eastward. Ardashir's forces encountered limited resistance in most Mesopotamian cities, whose populations had grown weary of Parthian political instability. The promise of restored order proved attractive to merchants and agricultural producers who had suffered from decades of warfare. Rome under Emperor Alexander Severus initially underestimated the Sasanian revolution, viewing Ardashir's rise as just another episode in Parthian instability. This miscalculation proved costly. Unlike Parthians, who relied on irregular warfare and sudden raids, Sasanians demonstrated capacity for sustained military campaigns supported by sophisticated logistics. The first major Roman-Sasanian confrontation occurred when Ardashir's forces besieged the Roman fortress city of Nisibis in northern Mesopotamia. The siege demonstrated Sasanian military evolution, systematic preparation, coordination between different force types, and ability to maintain extended operations far from home. Roman defenders, accustomed to Parthian hit-and-run tactics, faced a more methodical and persistent enemy capable of complex siege operations. Alexander Severus responded by organizing a major expedition in 231 AD involving substantial forces from multiple provinces, Rome's most significant eastern effort since Trajan's campaigns over a century earlier. However, the campaign revealed Roman misunderstanding of changed circumstances. The expedition achieved limited tactical successes, relieving besieged cities and conducting retaliatory raids, but couldn't prevent Ardashir from continuing systematic expansion. The emperor's premature victory declaration and troop withdrawal allowed Sasanians to resume territorial acquisitions with minimal interference. These early conflicts established patterns that would characterize Roman-Sasanian relations for 4 centuries. Sasanians demonstrated superior strategic planning and logistics. Romans retained advantages in siege warfare and infantry tactics. Neither possessed decisive superiority for permanent conquest of the other's core territories, leading to prolonged struggle for buffer regions, Armenia and northern Mesopotamia. The establishment of Sasanian power fundamentally altered Middle Eastern geopolitics. Unlike the decentralized Parthian system that had allowed Roman influence to penetrate deep into Iranian territories through diplomatic and commercial networks, the new Persian regime presented unified and ideologically coherent challenge to Roman hegemony. The combination of religious legitimacy, administrative efficiency, and military innovation created an imperial structure capable of sustained competition with Rome on equal terms. When Ardashir I died in 240 AD, he bequeathed his son Shapur not merely territorial holdings, but a sophisticated administrative apparatus, reformed military structure, and ideological framework, positioning the Sasanian dynasty as legitimate heir to Iran's ancient imperial tradition. Shapur would transform these foundations into infrastructure of sustained greatness. The young king inherited an empire still defining its identity and testing its limits, but within 2 decades he would achieve victories that would make Persian arms legendary and Rome tremble. Shapur ascended the throne in 240 AD during relative stability within the empire's core, allowing him to focus on external expansion and internal development. Contemporary sources describe Shapur as possessing his father's strategic acumen, combined with more grandiose vision of Persian imperial destiny. Standing tall with the characteristic aquiline nose of the Sasanian royal family, he cultivated divine kingship imagery, surpassing even Ardashir's innovations. His elaborate court ceremonies at Ctesiphon featured hundreds of courtiers in strict hierarchical order, their silk robes reflecting wealth flowing from expanded trade and territorial acquisitions. Rome during this period presented an increasingly attractive target. The crisis of the 3rd century had begun undermining Roman stability, frequent emperor changes, economic inflation, military rebellions, creating opportunities a unified Persian state could exploit. Unlike previous conflicts involving primarily border skirmishes, Shapur envisioned campaigns fundamentally altering the balance of power. His military preparations reflected expanded scope, systematic accumulation of siege equipment, training of specialized engineering units, development of logistics capable of supporting extended operations deep in Roman territory. Shapur's first major campaign targeted Roman positions in northern Mesopotamia. Beginning with systematic assault on Carrhae in 243 AD, Sasanian siege warfare had evolved considerably, incorporating sophisticated techniques from Roman and Chinese military traditions. Shapur's engineers constructed massive siege towers towering above city walls, wooden frameworks protected by iron plates, and wet hides against fire. These structures housed multiple levels of archers and crossbowmen, raining projectiles on defenders, while providing cover for assault troops with scaling ladders and battering rams. The siege engines demonstrated remarkable sophistication, massive torsion catapults hurling stone projectiles over 100 pounds against fortifications, creating visible cracks while demoralizing defenders psychologically. Sasanian engineers developed improved battering rams with bronze heads mounted on wheeled platforms. Maneuverable precisely against defensive weak points, Karha's fall after 3 months provided Shapur with strategic advantages and intelligence about Roman defensive capabilities. Captured engineers revealed fortress construction techniques and garrison supply procedures invaluable for subsequent campaigns. More importantly, the systematic victory demonstrated to other Roman cities that resistance would be futile and costly, encouraging surrender without fighting. Shapur's military successes attracted attention from Emperor Gordian III, who organized a substantial expeditionary force to counter Persian advances. The young Roman emperor, barely 20 years old and heavily influenced by his praetorian prefect Timesitheus, commanded an army including veteran legions recalled from the Rhine and Danube frontiers. These troops represented some of Rome's finest military units with decades of experience fighting Germanic tribes and other opponents. However, their expertise in frontier warfare against less organized enemies hadn't prepared them for confrontation with the sophisticated military machine that Shapur had developed. The Romans were about to learn a painful lesson about the new Persia. The decisive engagement occurred near the ancient city of Mesesha in 244 AD, where Sasanian forces demonstrated their tactical evolution beyond traditional Parthian methods. Shapur deployed his heavy cavalry in coordinated formations that could maintain sustained pressure while preserving reserves to exploit breakthrough opportunities. Persian cataphracts, warriors and horses encased in scale armor, wielded 12-foot lances with iron points designed to penetrate Roman mail armor. Behind these shock troops, mobile horse archers provided supporting fire while remaining ready to pursue fleeing enemies or harass Roman formations attempting to regroup. The Persian cavalry worked like a well-oiled machine, each unit knowing exactly what to do and when. The Roman legions at Mesech fought with their traditional discipline and tactical flexibility, forming the famous testudo formations that had conquered much of the known world. But the flat terrain of northern Mesopotamia favored cavalry operations, and Sasanian numerical superiority in mounted troops negated many traditional Roman advantages. Gordian III's forces found themselves gradually compressed into an increasingly smaller defensive perimeter, as wave after wave of Persian cavalry attacks prevented effective counter-offensive. The battle's climax came when Shapur personally led a concentrated cavalry charge against the Roman center, his distinctive royal banner visible above the melee as his bodyguard carved through enemy ranks. Contemporary accounts describe the king wielding a jeweled sword while mounted on a massive Nysian horse, its bronze-plated armor gleaming in the desert sun. Gordian III fell during this assault, struck down by a Persian lance, or trampled beneath advancing cavalry hooves. His death effectively ended organized Roman resistance, as surviving legions retreated in disorder toward Antioch. The victory at Mesech provided Shapur with unprecedented prestige and substantial material rewards. But this was just the beginning. The greatest humiliation for Rome was yet to come. Philip the Arab, who succeeded Gordian III as emperor, initially sought to restore Roman prestige through renewed military campaigns. However, practical realities of governing an empire facing multiple simultaneous threats forced him to adopt a more pragmatic approach. Gothic invasions along the Danube combined with increasing pressure from Germanic tribes along the Rhine meant Rome couldn't afford to maintain large armies in the east indefinitely. Philip's eventual peace negotiations with Shapur resulted in substantial Roman territorial concessions and payment of enormous tribute that further enriched the Sasanian treasury. The gold and silver flowing into Ctesiphon would fund building projects that surpassed even ancient Persepolis. The influx of Roman wealth and incorporation of skilled craftsmen from the Western Empire enabled Shapur to undertake building projects of unprecedented scale. The most ambitious involved founding entirely new cities designed to showcase Sasanian power. Shapur, established in Fars province around 266 AD, represented the pinnacle of Sasanian urban planning. The city's layout reflected both practical administrative needs and symbolic imperial ideology. Broad avenues radiating from a central palace complex created sightlines emphasizing royal authority while facilitating troop movement and official processions. The palace itself incorporated architectural elements from multiple cultural traditions, traditional Persian columned halls with Roman-style mosaics and Syrian decorative techniques. The throne room featured a massive barrel vault supported by intricately carved stone columns, their capitals decorated with images of royal hunts and divine investiture scenes. Bishapur's residential districts demonstrated sophisticated urban planning, providing for different social classes while maintaining architectural harmony. Wealthy merchants and officials occupied spacious houses built around central courtyards, walls decorated with elaborate stucco reliefs depicting mythological scenes and royal victories. Artisan quarters featured smaller but well-constructed buildings housing skilled workers, producing luxury goods that made Sasanian cities famous. Even poorest residential areas included public fountains, bathhouses, and markets providing amenities superior to many Roman provincial cities. The city's defensive fortifications incorporated lessons from recent campaigns. Massive walls constructed from carefully fitted stone blocks rose over 40 feet, surfaces angled to deflect siege projectiles while providing optimal fields of fire for defending archers. Towers at regular intervals housed catapults and ballistas capable of engaging enemy forces at considerable distances. The main gates featured complex entrance systems with multiple portcullises and murder holes, channeling attackers into killing zones. Bishapur wasn't just a city, it was a statement carved in stone that Sasanian Persia had arrived as a superpower. Bishapur's founding coincided with renewed military campaigns that would culminate in Shapur's greatest triumph. Emperor Valerian, who had assumed power during one of Rome's most turbulent periods, decided that decisive action against the Sasanians was necessary to restore imperial prestige and secure the eastern frontier. His preparations involved assembling the largest Roman army sent against Persia since Trajan's time, legions drawn from across the empire supported by auxiliary units from allied kingdoms. Valerian's army included approximately 70,000 troops organized in traditional legionary formations, but equipped with improved armor and weapons designed specifically for eastern warfare. The emperor had learned from previous defeats, incorporating more cavalry and siege equipment suitable for operations in Mesopotamian terrain. The campaign began promisingly, with several early victories recapturing cities lost during previous Sasanian advances. Valerian's methodical approach to territorial recovery initially caught Shapur off guard, as the Persian king had expected another hasty Roman offensive that could be defeated through superior mobility and tactical flexibility. The emperor's systematic restoration of Roman positions forced Shapur to abandon his preferred strategy of rapid cavalry strikes in favor of more conventional military confrontations. But Shapur was patient, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came near the city of Edessa in 260 AD, where both armies converged after months of maneuvering. The battle began with traditional cavalry skirmishes as both sides tested opponents' strength. Sasanian horse archers, riding swift horses bred in Iranian highlands, launched clouds of arrows at Roman formations while remaining beyond effective range of enemy projectiles. Romans responded with their own cavalry and auxiliary archers, creating swirling melee of mounted warriors. Then Shapur executed his tactical masterstroke, a feigned retreat drawing Roman cavalry into pursuing what appeared to be defeated Persian forces. As Valerian's horsemen advanced in disorder, believing they'd achieved breakthrough, concealed Sasanian cataphracts emerged from positions behind low hills and struck the Romans in the flank. The impact of this coordinated charge by heavily armored cavalry wielding long lances shattered Roman mounted units and created a gap in their battle line. The collapse of Roman cavalry exposed their infantry to direct assault by the main Persian force. And in the chaos, the unthinkable happened. Emperor Valerian himself was captured, seized by Sasanian cavalry as his bodyguard collapsed. A Roman emperor in chains. The shock reverberated throughout the ancient world. The capture of Valerian represented unprecedented humiliation for Roman arms and provided Shapur with a propaganda victory of immense proportions. Contemporary accounts described the emperor's seizure, the sight of a Roman emperor in chains sending shockwaves throughout the ancient world. Sasanian forces advanced deeper into Roman territory than any Persian army since Xerxes 700 years earlier. Syrian cities opened gates without resistance, while Roman garrisons abandoned positions rather than face the victorious Sasanian army. Antioch, one of the empire's most important eastern cities, fell after minimal resistance, providing Persians with enormous quantities of gold, silver, and luxury goods. The city's capture also yielded thousands of skilled craftsmen and intellectuals who would contribute to Sasanian cultural development for decades. Shapur's treatment of Valerian became legendary and horrifying. Some sources claim the Persian king used the captured emperor as a human footstool when mounting his horse, forcing Valerian to kneel and offer his back so Shapur could step on him to reach his saddle. Whether this happened or not, Shapur certainly made sure everyone knew about his victory. The rock reliefs carved at Nakshi Rustam near ancient Persepolis commemorated his military victories while establishing visual connections to Iran's imperial past. These massive stone carvings hewn from living cliff faces depicted the king receiving divine investiture from Ahura Mazda while trampling defeated Roman emperors beneath his horse's hooves. The relief depicting Valerian's capture represents perhaps the finest example of Sasanian royal propaganda art. Carved in exquisite detail, the scene shows Shapur mounted on his warhorse while grasping the kneeling Roman emperor by the hair. The king's elaborate crown decorated with the distinctive karimbos symbolizing divine authority towers above the humiliated Roman ruler whose imperial regalia contrasts sharply with his submissive posture. Surrounding figures include Sasanian nobles and captured Roman standards, emphasizing complete reversal of fortune. The artistic technique demonstrates remarkable sophistication, flowing drapery, detailed facial features, precise anatomical proportions rivaling finest classical sculpture. These weren't just pretty pictures, they were permanent reminders carved in stone that could never be erased. Persia had defeated Rome, captured its emperor, and proven itself the superior power. For the next century and a half, these images would inspire Persian pride and Roman shame. The enormous wealth captured during Western campaigns funded unprecedented expansion of Zoroastrian religious infrastructure. Shapur commissioned construction of hundreds of new fire temples, each designed to serve as both spiritual center and administrative headquarters for surrounding regions. These religious complexes featured sacred flames burning continuously, tended by professional priests who also maintained records of births, deaths, marriages, and property transfers. Cartier's influence reached its zenith during this period as the chief priest leveraged royal military successes to expand Zoroastrian authority throughout Sasanian territories. The priest's reforms standardized religious practices while eliminating competing cults that had flourished under more tolerant Parthian rule. Christian communities establishing themselves in major Persian cities faced systematic persecution designed to eliminate potential sources of disloyalty. But Shapur's reign wasn't just about war and conquest, it was a golden age of culture. The king's artistic patronage produced magnificent examples of Sasanian royal art. The rock reliefs at Nakshi Rustam weren't just propaganda, they were masterpieces. The investiture relief showed Shapur receiving the ring of power from Ahura Mazda while standing upon the prostrate body of Gordian III, a triple message of divine sanction, military victory, and royal majesty. The cultural flowering extended beyond monumental art to encompass literature, music, and scholarly pursuits. The royal library at Ctesiphon accumulated manuscripts from across the known world: Greek philosophical works, Indian mathematical treatises, Chinese technical manuals that Sasanian scholars translated into Middle Persian. This intellectual synthesis created new forms of knowledge influencing fields from astronomy to medicine. Sasanian court music incorporated instruments and melodic traditions from conquered territories while maintaining distinctively Persian characteristics. The royal orchestra included traditional Persian instruments like the barbat and chang alongside Roman lyres and Indian drums, creating complex musical arrangements accompanying elaborate court ceremonies. Professional musicians, many recruited from captured populations, developed new compositional techniques that would influence musical traditions throughout the Middle East for centuries. When Shapur first died in 272 AD, he left an empire at its zenith, militarily dominant, culturally sophisticated, economically prosperous. His son Hormizd I inherited this magnificent legacy, but maintaining what Shapur had built would prove far more difficult than creating it. The cracks were already beginning to show. Hormizd I's reign lasted barely 1 year, but it revealed significant challenges facing the empire. The new king faced immediate resistance from regional governors who had grown accustomed to substantial autonomy during Shapur's frequent military campaigns. Provincial administrators controlling vast territories and commanding their own military forces viewed the succession crisis as opportunity to expand influence. Several eastern province governors began withholding tax revenues, while others delayed responses to royal commands, testing the new monarch's ability to enforce central authority. Hormizd's attempts to assert control revealed his inexperience in complex political maneuvering. His harsh demands for immediate compliance alienated potential allies, while failing to intimidate more powerful regional commanders who possessed sufficient military strength to resist. Religious tensions that had been suppressed during Shapur's victorious reign began surfacing as groups within the empire sensed weakness. Christian communities which had faced systematic persecution began organizing more openly, testing the new king's commitment to enforcing religious orthodoxy. Followers of various mystery cults and local deities, driven underground by Zoroastrian reforms, started reasserting traditional practices. Cartier recognized dangerous implications of this religious revival for ideological unity underpinning Sasanian rule. The priest's extensive network of fire temples provided detailed intelligence about emerging threats to orthodox doctrine. His reports to Hormizd emphasized urgent need for renewed persecution. The most significant religious controversy involved treatment of Manichaean communities establishing themselves in major Persian cities. Mani, the religion's founder, had received limited protection during Shapur's reign due to his philosophical sophistication and international connections with communities throughout the Roman Empire and Central Asia. However, the new king proved far less tolerant, viewing Manichaeism as potentially subversive foreign influence threatening Zoroastrian orthodoxy. Hormizd's sudden death in 273 AD, possibly from poisoning by palace conspirators, brought his brother Bahram I to the throne amid even greater political instability. The new monarch faced accumulated problems of his predecessor's failed policies, while confronting additional challenges from ambitious relatives questioning his right to rule. Bahram possessed neither the military reputation nor administrative experience necessary to address the empire's underlying problems effectively. His physical frailty contrasted unfavorably with previous Sasanian kings' imposing stature, while his hesitant manner suggested enormous stress of governing during this turbulent period. Bahram Thamin's early reign saw Cartier's influence reach unprecedented heights. The high priest successfully positioned himself as primary architect of religious policy, implementing comprehensive reforms designed to eliminate religious diversity and strengthen Zoroastrian orthodoxy. His systematic approach to religious persecution would have profound consequences for the empire's cultural development and international relations. The persecution of Mani and his followers represented the most dramatic manifestation of this campaign. Cartier's agents received detailed instructions for identifying and arresting Manichaean teachers, while local fire temple priests reported suspicious religious activities. The high priest's personal involvement demonstrated the priority he placed on eliminating what he viewed as dangerous theological threat. Mani's arrest in 276 AD occurred at the royal court in Ctesiphon, where the religious teacher had come seeking audience with Bahram to defend his doctrines against Cartier's accusations of heresy. Contemporary accounts describe dramatic confrontation between the Manichaean prophet and Zoroastrian high priest, both presenting elaborate theological arguments before the assembled court. Cartier's accusations focused on Mani's dualistic cosmology, which the priest claimed undermined supreme authority of Ahura Mazda by attributing equal power to forces of darkness. The religious debate preceding Mani's condemnation revealed sophisticated theological knowledge characterizing educated Persian society. Both participants demonstrated familiarity with Greek philosophical traditions, Indian religious concepts, and traditional Iranian mythology. Mani's execution following 26 days of imprisonment sent shockwaves throughout the international religious community. The prophet's death by flaying, a particularly brutal execution reserved for serious religious crimes, was intended to discourage other potential heretics while satisfying Cartier's demands for exemplary punishment. The gruesome spectacle, conducted in Ctesiphon's main square, before thousands of spectators achieved its intended psychological impact while creating lasting symbol of religious persecution. Systematic persecution of Manichaean communities throughout the empire followed Mani's execution as Cartier's agents implemented comprehensive measures designed to eliminate all traces of the religion. Fire temple priests received authority to conduct house-to-house searches for Manichaean texts and religious artifacts, while local administrators compiled lists of suspected adherents. These operations resulted in thousands of arrests and executions. The religious persecution extended beyond Manichaeism to encompass other minority faiths that Cartier viewed as threats. Christian communities faced renewed harassment, accused of maintaining treasonous correspondence with Roman religious authorities. But the empire's problems went far deeper than religious disputes. External threats were mounting, and Persia was about to face enemies it had never encountered before. Along the northeastern frontiers, nomadic confederations were coalescing into formidable military forces, possessing both mobility to strike deep into Persian territory and organizational sophistication to sustain prolonged campaigns. The Kidderite Huns, emerging from the steppes beyond the Oxus River, represented the vanguard of a massive population movement that would reshape Central Asia's political geography. These nomadic warriors differed significantly from tribal raiders previous Sasanian kings had encountered. The Kidderites possessed advanced metallurgical skills enabling production of high-quality weapons and armor comparable to those manufactured in Persian workshops. Their composite bows, reinforced with horn and sinew, could penetrate traditional scale armor at distances exceeding Persian archery's effective range. More ominously, their military organization incorporated tactical innovations learned from conflicts with Chinese armies. The siege of Merv, the principal Persian stronghold in Khorasan province, revealed both tactical sophistication of the Kidderite military system and vulnerability of Sasanian frontier defenses to unconventional warfare. Nomadic forces surrounding the city employed siege techniques, combining traditional steppe mobility with engineering skills acquired through contact with Chinese and Indian military traditions. Their siege engines, constructed from materials gathered during their advance, demonstrated remarkable adaptability. The Kidderite army besieging Merv included approximately 40,000 warriors, organized into decimal units that could operate independently while maintaining coordination through elaborate horn signals and banner displays. Their cavalry rode sturdy ponies bred on Central Asian steppes, animals capable of surviving on minimal forage while maintaining endurance for extended campaigns. Merv's fall after a 4-month siege sent shockwaves throughout the Sasanian Empire and demonstrated inadequacy of existing frontier defense strategies. The city's capture provided Kidderites with enormous quantities of Persian military equipment, administrative records revealing locations of other strategic targets, and thousands of skilled craftsmen who could contribute to nomadic military capabilities. More significantly, the victory established Kidderite credibility among other Central Asian tribes who had previously hesitated to challenge Persian authority. The crisis intensified when Bahram III died in 283 AD, possibly hastened by stress of confronting these unprecedented military challenges. His successor faced an empire under siege from multiple directions: nomadic invasions in the east, renewed Roman pressure in the west, and internal religious and political tensions threatening to tear the state apart from within. The Sasanian Empire's survival would depend on finding leaders capable of addressing these simultaneous crises. But such leaders were in short supply. The succession of Bahram II marked a crucial turning point, as the empire's survival depended on the new monarch's ability to restore internal unity while defending against external threats. The young king, barely 25 years old at his accession, possessed neither military experience nor political connections that effective governance required during such turbulent circumstances. His early attempts to end civil war through negotiation with rebellious relatives revealed complex factional divisions that had developed within the Sasanian elite. Military campaigns that characterized early years of Bahram II's reign demonstrated both resilience of Sasanian military traditions and limitations imposed by internal division. Royal forces achieved several tactical victories against rebel armies, but these battlefield successes failed to translate into strategic gains. The prolonged civil war created opportunities for new threats to emerge. Nasser, a son of Shapur I, who had been governing Armenia, began positioning himself as compromise candidate who could unite various factions. His reputation for administrative competence and military skill, combined with direct descent from the dynasty's greatest king, made him an attractive alternative to feuding brothers. Nasser's victory over feuding claimants in 293 AD brought an experienced administrator to the throne when the empire faced its gravest external threats. The new king, now in his 50s, with greying hair and weathered features of a career military commander, possessed strategic acumen necessary to navigate complex diplomatic and military challenges. But Rome under Diocletian had undergone its own transformation, emerging from the crisis of the 3rd century with reformed military structures and renewed territorial ambitions. The establishment of the Tetrarchy created multiple centers of imperial authority, each capable of mounting independent military operations while coordinating strategic objectives. Galerius, appointed as Caesar in Eastern territories, brought fresh energy and tactical innovation to Roman operations. Unlike predecessors who relied primarily on traditional legionary formations, Galerius incorporated substantial cavalry units and mobile artillery that could match Sasanian tactical flexibility. His army included Syrian horsemen renowned for skill with composite bows, Germanic auxiliaries experienced in rapid movement, and specialized siege engineers. The initial confrontation between Nasser and Galerius occurred near ancient Callinicum in 296 AD. The battle demonstrated tactical evolution in both military systems, but this time things wouldn't go Persia's way. Nasser's tactical masterstroke at Callinicum involved a complex maneuver drawing Roman forces into a carefully prepared killing ground. The king personally led a feigned retreat that convinced Galerius his cavalry charges had achieved breakthrough. As Roman units advanced pursuing what appeared to be fleeing enemies, they found themselves trapped between converging Persian forces positioned specifically for this contingency. The collapse of Roman tactical cohesion occurred with devastating suddenness as Sasanian cataphracts emerged from concealed positions and struck advancing Romans in both flanks. The victory at Callinicum restored Sasanian prestige while providing Narseh with substantial material rewards that helped stabilize his recently unified kingdom. However, Galerius's response revealed strategic advantages the Tetrarchy system provided Roman military operations. Rather than accepting tactical setback as permanent strategic defeat, he immediately began preparations for renewed offensive incorporating lessons learned. His access to reinforcements from multiple imperial territories enabled him to replace losses while simultaneously expanding his army's overall strength. The Roman counteroffensive that began in 298 AD involved forces drawn from across the Eastern Empire, approximately 80,000 troops organized into both traditional legionary formations and new combined arms units designed specifically for operations against Persian cavalry forces. Armenian territories became the primary theatre as both empires recognized strategic importance of controlling mountain passes connecting the Iranian plateau to Anatolia. Galerius's breakthrough came through a combination of tactical innovation and diplomatic success. His negotiations with disaffected Armenian princes provided Roman forces with detailed intelligence about Persian defensive positions while opening alternative routes through mountain passes. So the decisive engagement occurred near the fortress city of Satala in 298 AD, where Narseh had concentrated forces to defend the primary route connecting Armenia to the Iranian plateau. Galerius's tactical solution involved complex flanking maneuver, utilizing secondary mountain paths to position Roman forces behind Persian defensive lines. This operation required exceptional coordination between multiple army units operating across difficult terrain. The successful execution demonstrated improved training and discipline, characterizing reformed Roman military system. The collapse of Persian resistance occurred when Roman forces attacking from multiple directions simultaneously overwhelmed Narseh's ability to coordinate effective defensive responses. The king himself escaped capture only through sacrifice of his bodyguard, who fought to death while their king fled towards safety of Persian territories. But the Romans captured something almost as valuable as the king himself, Narseh's entire royal household, including wives, children, and extensive retinue. The capture of Narseh's family represented invaluable diplomatic assets that Galerius could leverage in peace negotiations, while simultaneously humiliating Persian royal prestige. The sight of Sasanian royal women in Roman custody sent shockwaves throughout the Persian Empire, a reversal of fortune recalling Shapur's capture of Valerian, but in reverse. Galerius's advance following victory at Satala penetrated deeper into Persian territory than any Roman army since Trajan's campaigns nearly 2 centuries earlier. Armenian and Mesopotamian cities that had been under Sasanian control for generations opened gates to Roman forces rather than face siege warfare. The systematic nature of Roman territorial recovery demonstrated both effectiveness of Diocletian's military reforms and weakened condition of Persian border defenses. The peace negotiations that began in 299 AD reflected dramatically altered balance of power while establishing diplomatic precedents that would influence Persian-Roman relations for the remainder of the classical period. Narseh, operating from position of military weakness but possessing extensive diplomatic experience, sought to minimize territorial losses while preserving core Sasanian interests. His negotiating strategy emphasized mutual benefits of stable frontier arrangements while warning of regional instability that would result from excessive Roman territorial demands. Diocletian's personal involvement demonstrated priority he placed on achieving comprehensive settlement, securing Rome's eastern frontier for extended period. The Treaty of Nisibis, concluded in 299 AD, established territorial and diplomatic arrangements that would remain largely intact for over 60 years. Roman territorial gains included significant portions of Armenia and northern Mesopotamia, with frontier moved eastward to positions providing better defensive advantages. The treaty's commercial provisions reopened trade routes disrupted by warfare while establishing regulatory frameworks for cross-border commerce. Most innovative feature involved establishment of formal diplomatic protocols for managing Armenian affairs, recognizing the region's strategic importance to both empires while creating mechanisms for preventing future conflicts. Narse's acceptance of the treaty's terms reflected both realistic assessment of Persian military capabilities and strategic vision for the empire's long-term recovery. The territorial losses, while substantial, didn't threaten core Persian interests in the Iranian plateau or empire's access to Central Asian trade routes. More importantly, the peace settlement provided stability necessary for internal reconstruction following decades of civil war and external conflict. When Narse died in 302 AD, he bequeathed his son Hormizd II an empire that had achieved internal unity while maintaining peaceful relations with its primary external rival. But this peace wouldn't last forever. Hormizd II's reign focused on internal development designed to restore prosperity, characterizing Shapurban's golden age. His administrators implemented tax reforms encouraging commercial activity while providing sufficient revenue for essential government functions. Reconstruction of damaged cities and irrigation systems demonstrated royal commitment to material prosperity while creating employment. The king's religious policies reflected lessons learned from divisive persecution campaigns. While maintaining official support for Zoroastrian orthodoxy, Hormizd II adopted a more tolerant approach toward religious minorities, reducing internal tensions while preserving ideological unity. This moderate policy attracted support from merchant communities and urban populations who valued stability above doctrinal purity. However, the relative peace wouldn't survive the succession crisis following his premature death in 309 AD. His infant son Shapur II inherited the throne under circumstances recalling previous instability periods, though the Regency Council established to govern during his minority possessed greater experience and unity than earlier transitional administrations. The Regency period established administrative precedents that would influence Sasanian governmental practices for generations. Council members, drawn from the empire's most experienced administrators and military commanders, implemented collective decision-making procedures, balancing competing interests while maintaining effective governance. Their success in preserving internal stability during potentially vulnerable period demonstrated institutional maturity the Sasanian Empire had achieved. Shapur II's childhood occurred during renewed Roman territorial expansion under Constantine IV, whose conversion to Christianity added religious dimensions to traditional geopolitical competition. The Roman emperor's support for Christian communities throughout the Middle East created new diplomatic complications, while providing potential sources of internal subversion. These religious tensions would profoundly influence military conflicts dominating Shapur II's adult reign. The young king's education emphasized both traditional Persian royal accomplishments and practical skills necessary for effective imperial governance. His tutors included veteran military commanders who had served under Narse, experienced administrators familiar with complex diplomatic negotiations, and Zoroastrian priests responsible for maintaining ideological orthodoxy. This comprehensive program prepared him for extraordinary challenges that would define his unprecedented 70-year reign, the longest in Sasanian history. When Shapur II finally assumed personal rule, he would prove himself one of the greatest warrior kings in Persian history, earning the epithet the Great through military victories that restored Persian pride and territorial integrity. But that story belongs to the next chapter of our journey. Shapur II's personal rule began around 325 AD when he came of age, and he immediately demonstrated the strategic vision and military competence that would characterize his long reign. His first priority involved addressing the Arab tribal incursions along the empire's southern frontiers, raiders from the Arabian Peninsula who had exploited Persian internal instability to penetrate deep into Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf region. Shapur's campaigns against these Arab tribes were systematic and brutal, earning him the epithet Dul Aktaf, he of the shoulders, among Arab sources, referring to his practice of piercing the shoulders of captured tribal leaders. These southern campaigns secured the empire's vulnerable desert frontiers while demonstrating the young king's determination to restore Persian military prestige. But Shapur's primary focus remained the Roman frontier, where he sought to reverse the humiliating territorial losses imposed by the Treaty of Nisibis. His military preparations involved comprehensive reorganization of Persian armed forces, incorporating lessons learned from recent defeats while maintaining traditional strengths in heavy cavalry and siege warfare. The wars between Shapur II and successive Roman emperors would dominate the mid-4th century, involving repeated campaigns, prolonged sieges, and battles that demonstrated both empires' military sophistication. The struggle for Nisibis itself, besieged by Shapur multiple times between 337 and 350 AD, became legendary, with Roman defenders under Count Lucilianus repelling assault after assault through combination of strong fortifications, adequate supplies, and determined resistance. Shapur's eventual successes came through patient strategic planning rather than sudden victories. His capture of Amida in 359 AD after a 73-day siege demonstrated Persian persistence and engineering capabilities. The city's fall provided Shapur with crucial strategic advantage, while revealing Roman vulnerability when adequate relief forces couldn't arrive in time. The Emperor Constantius II's attempts to counter Persian advances achieved limited success, as Roman forces found themselves stretched thin between eastern campaigns and threats along other frontiers. The death of Constantius in 361 AD and the brief reign of Julian the Apostate, who launched a disastrous invasion of Mesopotamia that ended with his death in battle and Roman armies' retreat, represented the climax of Shapur II's military achievements. The subsequent peace of 363 AD forced Rome to abandon Nisibis and cede substantial territories, effectively reversing the Treaty of Nisibis and restoring Persian dominance in the region. Shapur II had achieved what no Persian king since Shapur I had accomplished, forcing Rome to accept defeat and territorial concessions. His 70-year reign ended in 379 AD, leaving an empire that had recovered from near collapse to renewed great power status. But the empire Shapur II's successors inherited faced entirely new strategic challenges. Along northeastern frontiers, nomadic confederations were coalescing into formidable forces. The Hephthalite Huns, emerging from the steppes beyond the Oxus, represented an even more dangerous threat than the Kidarites. These new adversaries possessed superior military organization and demonstrated greater strategic ambition, viewing conquest of Persian territories as stepping stones toward establishing a nomadic empire encompassing all of Central Asia and much of the Middle East. Hephthalite military capabilities reflected culmination of nomadic tactical evolution and incorporation of siege techniques learned through conflicts with Chinese, Indian, and Persian armies. The late 4th and early 5th centuries saw successive Sasanian kings struggling to manage both the Roman frontier and the nomadic threat. Bahram Bathor, 388-399 AD, adopted cautious policies emphasizing negotiation and tribute payments rather than military confrontation. Yazdegerd I, 399–421 AD, whose epithet the Sinner reflected later Zoroastrian disapproval of his religious policies, possessed intellectual sophistication and diplomatic skills necessary to address complex challenges. His diplomatic initiatives with Hephthalite leaders produced temporary stabilization while providing breathing space for internal reconstruction. The tribute agreements involved substantial annual payments in gold and luxury goods, but these costs proved more manageable than enormous expenditures required to maintain armies in constant readiness. However, these peaceful arrangements couldn't survive the succession crisis following Yazdegerd's death in 421 AD, when competing claimants created opportunities for nomadic leaders to exploit Persian internal divisions. Bahram Fathi, known to history as Bahram Gur, emerged victorious from this succession struggle with military support of Arab allies cultivated through his mother's Lakhmid connections. His rise to power marked beginning of one of most celebrated reigns in Sasanian history. Bahram Fathi's legendary status in Persian literature and folklore reflects both his military achievements and his patronage of cultural activities, producing finest examples of Sasanian art and poetry. Contemporary descriptions portray him as exceptionally tall and powerfully built, with dark complexion inherited from Arab maternal ancestry. His physical prowess, demonstrated through famous hunting expeditions and personal combat achievements, provided military credibility necessary to command respect. Bahram Fathi's approach to the nomadic threat combined military innovation with diplomatic sophistication. His first major campaign against the Hephthalites in 427 AD demonstrated effectiveness of military innovations. But the protracted nature of steppe warfare revealed limitations of Persian logistical capabilities when operating at such distances from territorial base. The climactic battle of Bahram Fathi's campaign occurred near ancient Balkh in 428 AD, where Hephthalite forces finally accepted decisive engagement. The Hephthalite army, commanded by a leader whose name is lost to history but whose tactical acumen rivaled greatest steppe generals, deployed approximately 50,000 warriors in formations designed to maximize mobility advantages while minimizing exposure to Persian artillery fire. The engagement began with traditional cavalry skirmishing, but quickly evolved into complex tactical contest, demonstrating military evolution both sides had undergone. Bahram Fathi's personal leadership during the battle's critical moments proved decisive. The king led a concentrated cavalry charge that broke through the Hephthalite center when their tactical cohesion began wavering under sustained pressure. His distinctive royal banner, visible above the chaos, provided rallying point while demonstrating royal commitment to achieving victory regardless of personal risk. The Hephthalite collapse occurred with startling suddenness as carefully coordinated formations disintegrated under pressure. Nomadic units that had maintained disciplined cohesion throughout hours of combat suddenly broke and fled toward distant steppes, abandoning wounded comrades and much equipment. The victory provided Bahram Fathi with enormous prestige while demonstrating that nomadic military superiority was not invincible when confronted by properly organized Persian forces. The enormous wealth captured funded unprecedented expansion of royal building projects and cultural patronage that would define Bahram Fathi's reign in historical memory. His architectural commissions included construction of magnificent palaces incorporating design elements from conquered territories while maintaining distinctively Persian characteristics. When Bahram V died in 438 AD, he left an empire at relative peace and prosperity, but this stability would prove temporary as subsequent rulers struggled to maintain the delicate balance between Roman pressure in the west and nomadic threats in the east. The mid to late 5th century saw Sasanian power gradually eroding under combined pressures. Perosdafir, 459–484 AD, faced the most serious crisis when he launched a disastrous campaign against the Hephthalites. The king's determination to eliminate the nomadic threat once and for all led him to commit massive military resources to a campaign deep into Central Asian steppes. The result was catastrophic. At the Battle of Herat in 484 AD, Hephthalite forces annihilated the Persian army. Perez himself died on the battlefield, trampled beneath nomadic cavalry hooves. His death left the Sasanian Empire in unprecedented crisis, militarily defeated, financially exhausted, and facing Hephthalite occupation of eastern provinces, while the royal treasury had been depleted by decades of unsuccessful campaigns and tribute payments. The empire that had once captured Roman emperors now found itself paying tribute to nomadic overlords. How had things gone so wrong? Perez's brother Balash, 484–488 AD, assumed the throne amid circumstances recalling the darkest periods of Sasanian history. The new king's physical frailty contrasted sharply with warrior kings of the past. His thin frame and prematurely greying hair reflected exhaustion of the royal bloodline after generations of warfare. The tribute payments demanded by Hephthalite overlords consumed revenues that had previously funded public works, military maintenance, and administrative operations. Provincial governors deprived of adequate resources began imposing additional taxes while reducing expenditures for essential services. Agricultural productivity suffered severe disruptions as nomadic raids penetrated deep into traditionally secure farming regions. Grain prices in major cities increased dramatically, creating hardships for artisans, merchants, and officials whose incomes remained fixed. The social tensions generated by economic difficulties were compounded by visible failure of traditional Zoroastrian explanations for imperial misfortunes. The fire temples that had served as centers of community life could offer no convincing theological justification for the empire's humiliation at nomadic hands. Religious dissatisfaction created opportunities for alternative spiritual movements. Christian communities which had maintained underground networks despite periodic persecution began attracting converts. More significantly, entirely new religious movements emerged, combining elements from various spiritual traditions while addressing specific social and economic grievances generated by the empire's disasters. The most influential of these new movements developed around teachings of Mazdak, a Zoroastrian priest whose radical reinterpretation of traditional doctrine offered revolutionary solutions to social inequalities exacerbated by military defeats and economic hardship. Mazdak's background as member of established religious hierarchy provided him with intimate knowledge of orthodox theology, enabling him to formulate critiques possessing both intellectual sophistication and practical relevance. His physical appearance embodied aesthetic ideals characterizing his religious movement. Tall and gaunt with pale complexion of someone spending long hours in scholarly pursuits, wearing simple white robes contrasting dramatically with elaborate silk garments favored by traditional Zoroastrian priests. His penetrating gaze and measured speaking style created impression of spiritual authority, attracting followers from across social spectrum, including nobles who had grown disillusioned with conventional religious and political leadership. The theological foundation of Mazdakite doctrine rested on radical reinterpretation of traditional Zoroastrian dualism, emphasizing social implications of cosmic struggle between light and darkness. Mazdak taught that existing social inequalities represented manifestations of evil principles' influence, arguing that true followers of Ahura Mazda had religious obligation to eliminate poverty, oppression, and material inequality. This provided religious justification for social reforms challenging fundamental structures of Sasanian society. Balash's response to the growing Mazdakite movement reflected both his personal religious convictions and practical recognition of political dangers associated with widespread social unrest. His own theological training made him sympathetic to reform movements claiming orthodox Zoroastrian inspiration. However, his dependence on noble support created constraints on his ability to endorse radical social changes threatening established interests. Balash's death in 488 AD, possibly from poisoning by nobles who feared his growing sympathy for Mazdakite reforms, brought Kavad I to the throne during one of the most volatile periods in Sasanian history. The new king, barely 30 years old but already experienced in provincial administration, possessed both intellectual sophistication necessary to understand complex theological arguments and political acumen required to navigate dangerous factional divisions. Kavad's physical appearance embodied traditional martial characteristics while suggesting intellectual interests defining his governance approach. Standing over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and muscular build of trained warrior, he nevertheless possessed thoughtful expression and careful speech patterns of someone who'd spent considerable time studying philosophical and theological texts. His dark eyes, described as capable of shifting rapidly between gentle contemplation and fierce determination, reflected complex personality, enabling him to pursue radical reforms while maintaining respect of military commanders. The new king's initial encounters with Mazdakite teachings occurred through personal friendship with nobles who had become converts. These relationships provided Kavad with detailed knowledge of Mazdakite theology, while enabling him to assess the movement's potential for addressing the empire's fundamental problems. Kavad's public endorsement of Mazdakite reforms in 496 AD marked revolutionary turning point, as royal authority was deployed for first time in support of systematic social transformation rather than preservation of existing hierarchical structures. The king's proclamation announced intention to implement comprehensive reforms designed to eliminate poverty and social inequality throughout the empire. Specific measures targeted vast estates accumulated by noble families, proposing division of underutilized properties among landless farmers. Urban reforms included measures regulating commercial activities and preventing excessive wealth accumulation by merchant families. But traditional noble families responded with organized resistance, quickly escalating into open rebellion. The opposition coalition included wealthy landowners whose economic interests were directly threatened, Zoroastrian priests viewing Mazdakite theology as heretical deviation, and military commanders fearing social upheaval would undermine disciplined hierarchical structures. The rebellion that erupted in 498 AD demonstrated both depth of elite opposition and sophisticated organizational capabilities traditional authorities retained. Rebel forces commanded by experienced military officers possessed superior equipment and tactical training. The capture of Ctesiphon by rebel forces in 499 AD represented the climax of noble resistance. Kavad's deposition and imprisonment marked temporary triumph of conservative forces, but the story was far from over. Kavad's brother Jamasp, installed as king by successful rebels, possessed neither military reputation nor administrative experience necessary to address underlying problems. His physical frailty and hesitant manner contrasted unfavorably with memories of Kavad's dynamic leadership, while his immediate abandonment of popular reform programs alienated rural and urban populations who had benefited from Mazdakite policies. The new regime's dependence on noble support prevented effective responses to continuing Hephthalite pressure or economic difficulties. Then something remarkable happened. Kavad escaped from imprisonment in 501 AD with assistance of his wife Parvandok, who had maintained contact with loyal supporters throughout his captivity. The deposed king's flight to Hephthalite territories, where he sought military assistance from the very nomadic enemies who had previously humiliated Persian arms, represented desperate gamble, revealing his determination to regain power regardless of costs. The Hephthalite king's decision to provide Kavad with substantial military support reflected nomadic leaders' sophisticated understanding of Persian internal politics and recognition that restored Kavad would be more likely to maintain peaceful relations than the noble-dominated regime replacing him. The alliance between exiled Sasanian king and former enemies created one of most remarkable diplomatic reversals in ancient history. The army accompanying Kavad's return in 502 AD included approximately 30,000 Hephthalite cavalry, whose tactical capabilities had been proven through decades of successful warfare. These nomadic warriors possessed superior mobility and archery skills, complementing disciplined formations of Persian military units remaining loyal to the exiled king. The campaign restoring Kavad demonstrated both military effectiveness of the Hephthalite-Persian alliance and fundamental weakness of Jamasp's regime among general population. City after city opened gates to advancing forces as local populations welcomed return of the king who had championed their interests against noble exploitation. The speed of Kavad's advance reflected not only superior military capabilities, but popular support his reform programs had generated. The final confrontation occurred near ancient city of Ray in 503 AD, where Jamasp concentrated remaining forces in desperate attempt to preserve noble control. Kavad's personal leadership, fighting alongside nomadic allies while wearing distinctive royal armor symbolizing legitimate Sasanian authority, inspired forces to achieve complete victory. Jamasp's death during battle, struck down by Hephthalite arrow while attempting to rally fleeing troops, ended noble rebellion and restored Kavad to unchallenged control. However, the king's dependence on foreign military support created new diplomatic obligations, while social tensions generating original conflict remained largely unresolved. Kavad's second reign would require far more careful political maneuvering than his first attempt at revolutionary transformation. The restored Kavad's approach to implementing Mazdakite reforms reflected lessons learned from his overthrow and demonstrated greater political sophistication in managing competing interests. Rather than immediately resuming comprehensive social transformation, provoking noble rebellion, the king adopted a more gradual approach, introducing reforms incrementally while maintaining sufficient traditional structures to prevent organized resistance. This tactical adjustment enabled him to achieve many original objectives while avoiding political mistakes leading to temporary deposition. Land redistribution programs resuming in 505 AD incorporated safeguards protecting legitimate noble interests while addressing grievances of landless peasants. Royal commissioners conducted detailed surveys identifying underutilized estates that could be subdivided without destroying economic foundations of cooperative noble families. Urban reform initiatives demonstrated similar sophistication as royal administrators worked with existing merchant and artisan organizations to implement changes addressing popular grievances without completely disrupting established commercial relationships. Price regulation mechanisms incorporated input from guild representatives while creating appeal procedures enabling legitimate businesses to seek relief from threatening regulations. However, gradual moderation of Mazdakite reforms enabling Kavad to maintain political stability also created tensions within the movement itself, as radical followers expecting immediate and complete social transformation became increasingly critical of what they viewed as royal compromise. The emergence of extremist factions advocating more aggressive approaches created new challenges for royal authority, while providing opportunities for opponents to exploit internal divisions. The most serious manifestation of radical Mazdakite activity occurred in eastern provinces, where local leaders interpreted royal reform policies as authorization for complete elimination of private property and traditional family structures. These extreme interpretations resulted in violent confrontations, creating administrative chaos, threatening stability of territories remaining vulnerable to Hephthalite invasion. Kavad's response demonstrated pragmatic approach to implementing social reforms while preserving imperial stability. Royal forces dispatched to restore order included both traditional Persian military units and Hephthalite cavalry, whose presence served as a reminder of kings' continuing alliance with nomadic powers. The systematic suppression conducted with sufficient force to restore administrative control, while avoiding excessive brutality, revealing sophisticated political calculations. The gradual suppression of the Mazdakite movement, beginning around 524 AD, reflected both kings' recognition that continuing social upheaval threatened imperial stability and awareness that his son Khosrow possessed fundamentally different views about proper relationship between royal authority and social reform. The execution of Mazdak himself around 528 AD symbolized definitive end of revolutionary phase, while demonstrating Kavad's determination to ensure smooth succession transition. The coronation of Khosrow in 531 AD marked ascension of a monarch whose reign would fundamentally transform the Sasanian Empire from realm recovering from social upheaval into the most sophisticated and powerful state of the ancient world. Standing nearly 6 feet tall with characteristic aquiline nose of the Sasanian dynasty, the new king possessed intellectual bearing distinguishing him from more martially focused predecessors. His dark eyes reflected both penetrating intelligence and calculating ambition, suggesting analytical mind that would revolutionize Persian administration, military organization, and cultural development over the next 5 decades. But the empire Khosrow inherited bore scars of his father's revolutionary experiments and their subsequent suppression. Provincial administration had been disrupted by decades of social upheaval. Military effectiveness had been compromised by factional divisions. The royal treasury remained strained by costs of maintaining Hephthalite alliances and suppressing internal rebellions. Khosrow's approach to these challenges reflected comprehensive education from the empire's most distinguished scholars, administrators, and military commanders. His tutors had included veterans of Bahram Fez' Central Asian campaigns, experienced provincial governors understanding complexities of managing diverse populations, and Zoroastrian theologians providing orthodox religious training. This foundation enabled him to understand both theoretical principles of effective governance and practical realities of implementing complex policies across vast territories. The administrative reforms that would earn Khosrow the epithet Anushirvan, the immortal soul, began with systematic reorganization of imperial bureaucracy designed to eliminate inefficiencies and corruption developed during previous decades. The king established new administrative departments with clearly defined responsibilities and reporting structures, creating governmental apparatus capable of coordinating complex operations. Each department received detailed written procedures, standardizing administrative practices, while establishing accountability mechanisms enabling royal oversight. The most significant innovation involved creation of professional civil service recruited through competitive examinations, testing candidates' knowledge of law, mathematics, geography, and administrative procedures. This meritocratic approach represented dramatic departure from traditional practices, relying on hereditary privilege and personal connections. The new system attracted talented individuals from across social spectrum, while reducing influence of noble families who had previously dominated administrative positions. The examination system required candidates to demonstrate proficiency in multiple languages including Middle Persian, Aramaic, and Greek, reflecting multicultural nature of the empire. Mathematical tests included problems related to taxation calculations, military logistics, and engineering projects. Legal examinations covered both traditional Zoroastrian law and practical jurisprudence developed through centuries of imperial governance. Provincial administration underwent equally comprehensive transformation as Khosrow replaced traditional satrap system with more centralized structure. The empire was divided into 4 major regions, each governed by a sparbed possessing both civil and military authority. These regional commanders reported directly to the king through sophisticated communication networks enabling rapid transmission of orders and intelligence across vast distances. Taxation reform represented perhaps the most crucial element of Khosrow's administrative revolution. The new system needed to generate sufficient revenue for ambitious military and construction projects, while avoiding oppressive burden contributing to social unrest during his father's reign. The king commissioned comprehensive surveys of agricultural productivity throughout the empire, creating detailed records of land quality, irrigation capabilities, and crop yields, enabling more accurate and equitable tax assessments. These surveys required several years to complete and involved thousands of trained assessors measuring fields, evaluating soil conditions, and calculating potential revenues. The new taxation system replaced arbitrary levies with fixed assessments based on objective criteria, including land area, soil fertility, and water access. Farmers received written documentation of tax obligations, eliminating uncertainty and potential abuse. Payment schedules were adjusted to accommodate seasonal agricultural cycles. Military reform complemented administrative reorganization in creating governmental apparatus necessary for Khosrow's ambitious foreign policy objectives. The king recognized that traditional Persian advantages in heavy cavalry and siege warfare needed supplementation with improved organizational structures and tactical innovations addressing diverse challenges posed by Roman legions, nomadic raiders, and various regional opponents. The reformed Sasanian army incorporated lessons from decades of conflict while maintaining distinctive characteristics making Persian forces formidable. Heavy cavalry retained traditional cataphract equipment but received enhanced training in coordinated maneuvers, enabling more flexible tactical responses. Infantry development represented significant innovation, as Khosrow recognized need for foot soldiers capable of operating effectively in varied terrain. New infantry formations included specialized units trained for mountain warfare, siege operations, and urban combat. The Eternal Peace Treaty negotiated with Emperor Justinian I in 532 AD represented diplomatic culmination of Khosrow's early reign. The agreement addressed long-standing territorial disputes while establishing commercial and diplomatic frameworks, enabling both empires to focus resources on other strategic priorities. Treaty negotiations revealed Khosrow's diplomatic skill and recognition that military conflict with Rome, while potentially profitable short-term, would ultimately drain resources needed for internal development and eastern frontier defense. Territorial provisions established clear boundaries between Roman and Persian spheres, while creating mechanisms for resolving future disputes diplomatically. Armenia received special status, acknowledging both empires' interests while providing local autonomy, reducing incentives for rebellion. Justinian's agreement to pay substantial subsidies for Persian maintenance of Caucasian fortifications provided Khosrow with additional revenue, while acknowledging mutual benefits both empires derived from preventing nomadic incursions. However, the eternal peace would prove decidedly temporary, lasting barely a decade before renewed conflict erupted. The intellectual revolution accompanying Khosrow's administrative and military reforms manifested most dramatically in systematic translation of Greek philosophical and scientific texts into Middle Persian. This unprecedented scholarly undertaking reflected the king's recognition that effective governance required access to accumulated wisdom of different civilizations while demonstrating commitment to establishing the Sasanian Empire as intellectual center of the ancient world. The translation movement began with the arrival of Neoplatonic philosophers fleeing closure of Academy of Athens by Emperor Justinian in 529 AD. But these scholars, including figures like Damasius and Simplicius, brought extensive libraries of Greek texts covering philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other fields developed over centuries of Hellenic intellectual achievement. The Royal Library at Ctesiphon became center of this translation enterprise as teams of bilingual scholars worked systematically through Greek manuscripts, creating Middle Persian versions accessible to Persian readers. The process involved more than simple linguistic conversion. Scholars needed to adapt Greek philosophical concepts and scientific terminology to Persian intellectual frameworks while preserving essential meaning. This complex undertaking required extensive collaboration between Greek refugee scholars, Persian intellectuals, and linguistic specialists. Philosophical texts received particular attention as Khosrow recognized their potential value for developing more sophisticated approaches to governmental administration and legal jurisprudence. Works by Plato and Aristotle provided theoretical frameworks for understanding political organization and ethical behavior, complementing traditional Zoroastrian teachings. Scientific translations encompassed mathematical treatises advancing Persian understanding of geometry, astronomy, and engineering principles. Medical texts introduced diagnostic techniques and therapeutic approaches, improving healthcare while contributing to development of Persian medical schools. Khosrow's reign also saw magnificent cultural patronage, producing some of the finest examples of Sasanian art and architecture. The king commissioned elaborate palace complexes incorporating latest architectural innovations while maintaining distinctively Persian aesthetic principles. The royal court at Ctesiphon became showcase for Sasanian cultural sophistication, attracting scholars, artists, and craftsmen from across the known world. Court ceremonies reached unprecedented levels of elaboration, with hundreds of officials arranged in precise hierarchical order, elaborate costumes, and sophisticated musical accompaniment. The famous story of Khosrow's mechanical throne that could rise into the air, surrounded by singing mechanical birds, whether true or legendary, captured imagination of contemporaries and demonstrated Persian technological ambitions. When Khosrow died in 579 AD, after nearly 50 years of rule, he left an empire at the zenith of its administrative sophistication, military power, and cultural achievement. But his successors would prove unable to maintain the delicate balance he had achieved. Within 50 years, everything he built would lie in ruins. Hormizd IV, 579 to 590 AD, inherited an empire at peak territorial extent and administrative sophistication, yet within 50 years these achievements would lie in ruins. The new king possessed his father's intellectual curiosity but lacked diplomatic finesse and military acumen, enabling Khosrow to maintain delicate balance. Standing slightly shorter than his imposing father, Hormizd compensated through almost obsessive attention to governmental detail, impressing courtiers, while alienating military commanders valuing decisive leadership. His controlling tendency proved particularly problematic in military affairs, where interference with field commanders' tactical decisions created dangerous delays. Domestic policies reflected commitment to continuing administrative reforms while addressing social tensions. His religious tolerance maintained Zoroastrian supremacy while avoiding persecution characterizing earlier periods. However, this created friction with Orthodox priests viewing any accommodation with non-believers as dangerous compromise. The military challenges that would destroy Hormizd's reign began along northeastern frontiers, where Göktürk expansion created new pressures following successful destruction of Hephthalite power. The Turkish Confederation's rapid territorial acquisitions brought nomadic forces within striking distance of major Persian cities, while disrupting trade relationships providing substantial revenues. Bahram Chobin, the general who would ultimately overthrow Hormizd, first distinguished himself during defensive campaigns against these incursions. His background differed from traditional Persian nobles. His family belonged to the Mihran clan, one of 7 great Parthian houses maintaining influence throughout Sasanian period despite non-Persian origins. Physically, Bahram embodied martial ideals Persian society associated with effective military leadership. Standing over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and muscular build, he possessed commanding presence inspiring confidence among troops while intimidating opponents. Bahram's victory over major Göktürk invasion near Balkh in 588 AD showcased effectiveness of his military reforms while providing desperately needed demonstration of continued Persian capability. The battle demonstrated sophisticated understanding of warfare that contradicted assumptions about nomadic superiority. However, Hormizd's response revealed insecurity and poor judgment, leading to his downfall. Rather than celebrating Bahram's success, the king chose to minimize his achievements, creating resentment. The deteriorating relationship was exacerbated by Hormizd's decision to reduce Bahram's command authority, administrative changes appearing to reflect royal fear rather than rational assessment. The palace coup bringing Bahram to power in 590 AD occurred with startling swiftness, as military units declared support for the general, restoring Persian honor. Hormizd's assassination eliminated primary obstacle to Bahram's assumption of royal authority. However, Bahram's seizure faced immediate challenges from Khosrow II, Hormizd's son, whose escape enabled him to organize resistance. The young prince possessed both legitimacy of royal birth and political acumen necessary to exploit the constitutional crisis. The civil war that erupted divided the empire while creating opportunities for external enemies to exploit internal chaos. Khosrow II's decision to seek Byzantine assistance represented desperate gamble, violating fundamental principles of Persian independence while offering only realistic prospect for defeating Bahram's superior forces. Emperor Maurice provided substantial military support, approximately 40,000 troops, enabling Khosrow's restoration in 591 AD. However, the young king's dependence on Byzantine support created diplomatic obligations constraining Persian policy while establishing precedents for foreign intervention that would have profound consequences. The territorial concessions promised to Maurice included strategically important regions along the western frontier, while commercial agreements provided Byzantine merchants unprecedented access to Persian markets. But Maurice's assassination in 602 AD by the usurper Phocas created entirely new diplomatic situation, ultimately leading to the greatest war in ancient history between Persian and Byzantine empires. Khosrow II's decision to use Maurice's death as justification for military intervention reflected both genuine outrage at his benefactor's murder and recognition that crisis provided unprecedented opportunities for territorial expansion. The Great War, beginning in 603 AD, would consume both empires' resources while reshaping Middle Eastern political geography in ways neither ruler could have anticipated. The Persian offensive demonstrated military effectiveness of reforms implemented during previous decade. Khosrow's systematic territorial conquests reflected sophisticated strategic planning and determination to achieve permanent gains. The capture of Damascus in 613 AD provided control over one of most important commercial centers. The conquest of Jerusalem in 614 AD represented climactic achievement. Capturing Christianity's most sacred city sent shockwaves throughout the Byzantine Empire. The systematic removal of Christian relics, including the True Cross, to Ctesiphon, symbolized complete reversal of fortune. At its peak around 620 AD, the Sasanian Empire controlled territories from Egypt to Central Asia, achieving territorial extent surpassing even Achaemenid predecessors. But this triumph was illusion. The enormous costs of Byzantine war depleted the royal treasury, while systematic conscription disrupted food production. Byzantine Emperor Heraclius's dramatic counter-offensive 622-628 AD, striking directly into the Persian heartland, exposed fatal weaknesses in overextended Sasanian military. Khosrow II's assassination in February 628 AD by his own son Kavad II marked beginning of the most catastrophic period in Sasanian history. The great king's death in palace dungeons symbolized complete breakdown of royal authority. What followed was chaos. Between 628 and 632 AD, the empire witnessed rapid succession of rulers. Kavad II, 8 months. Ardashir III, child king. Shahrabaraz, Boran, Azarmidokht, each representing different factions, none capable of restoring order. When Yazdegerd III, barely 8 years old, ascended in 632 AD, the empire was shattered. And from the Arabian Peninsula, a new power was emerging that would prove more dangerous than any enemy Persia had ever faced. The Arabs were coming, united under Islam's banner, and the Sasanian Empire, despite 400 years of glory, had nothing left to stop them. Subscribe to Flow of History to discover how this ancient superpower fell in just 20 years to armies from the desert, and how its legacy shaped the Islamic world that replaced it.